Alara Whitfield had 11 minutes before the carriage arrived, and she was spending every one of them trying not to throw up on her dead mother's dress. The gown was emerald silk, the kind of green that doesn't exist in nature unless something is either very alive or very poisonous. It had been folded inside a cedar trunk in the attic for 9 years, pressed beneath old letters and a pair of dancing shoes that still held the shape of feet that would never wear them again. The silk smelled like storage and loss, and a perfume Elara couldn't name but recognized somewhere behind her ribs. She pulled the zipper up her back with the kind of determination usually reserved for diffusing things that could go wrong in permanent ways. The dress fit, not perfectly. It fit the way a secret fits when you finally say it out loud. A little too tight in some places, a little too loose in others, but undeniably real. Her stepsister Megan was going to lose her mind. Elara checked herself in the only mirror left in the house, a cracked hand mirror she kept hidden inside her pillowcase because Megan had removed every other reflective surface 3 weeks ago. Not cruelty, Megan had explained with that voice she used, the one that sounded like honey poured over broken glass. Mercy. Why would Elara need a mirror when she had nothing worth looking at? The face staring back at her from the cracked glass was pale, sharp-boned, and carrying the kind of dark circles that spoke of years rather than nights. Her hair was dark and thick and doing its own thing, because hair products cost money she didn't have. She had her mother's jaw. Everyone said so, the ones who still remembered her mother, which was almost nobody. She didn't have a wolf. That was the thing. In a world where your wolf was your worth, your rank, your voice in any room that mattered, Elara Whitfield was silent. Born wolfless. Half-breed, they called her, though nobody could explain which half was the problem. Her mother had been a full-blooded wolf of the Ashwick line before she married Gerald Whitfield, and died 2 years later, under circumstances the family described as tragic, and Elara described as suspicious, whenever she'd had enough cheap wine, to be honest. Gerald, her father, the man who had shoved a wrinkled invitation into her hand behind the kitchen door that morning, while his wife Claire was at her hair appointment, and Megan was getting her nails shaped into weapons. He hadn't looked at Elara when he did it. His hand was shaking, and he smelled like whiskey at 9 in the morning, which was early even for him. "Don't tell them I gave you this," he said to the wall behind her head. She took the invitation, heavy cardstock, gold lettering, the royal seal pressed into wax the color of midnight. The Royal Lichen Ball, an invitation to the most exclusive gathering in the kingdom, where the unmated wolves of noble blood paraded themselves before the Alpha King in hopes of catching his eye, his scent, his claim. Elara had as much business at that ball as a match had in a dynamite factory. She went anyway. The carriage was not really a carriage. It was a hired car, driven by a man named Eddie, who smelled like cigarettes and asked no questions, which made him the best company she'd had in months. The drive to the Obsidian Palace took 40 minutes through the hill country, past estates that got bigger and gates that got taller, until the road itself seemed to narrow under the weight of all that money. She pressed her forehead against the cold window and watched the world blur. The palace appeared the way power always appears, gradually, and then all at once. Black stone towers against a sky that was showing off its stars, torchlight along a drive lined with wolves in formal uniforms, cars ahead of her, long and dark and expensive, depositing women in gowns that cost more than her father's house. Her stomach turned. She pressed her palm flat against it and willed it to behave. Eddie pulled up to the entrance. "You want me to wait?" "Can you?" "I charge by the hour." She had enough cash for 2 hours. After that, she'd either be inside finding a ride home or walking 5 miles in her mother's heels, which were a half size too small, and already making promises about blisters. 2 hours, she said. "You got it." She stepped out. The air smelled like pine and expensive cologne, and the particular ozone that gathered when too many wolves occupied the same square footage. Her skin prickled, not with a wolf's instinct. She didn't have that, just plain human anxiety, the ordinary kind that came from walking into a room where every living thing was more powerful than you. The guards at the gate were mountains in suits. They checked her invitation once, twice, 3 times. The third guard held it up to the torchlight and squinted at it like he was trying to find the catch. Name? Elara Whitfield. Pack? She paused. The honest answer was complicated. The simple answer was embarrassing. Silver Crest. By birth. The guard's eyebrow moved half an inch, which in guard language was the equivalent of falling out of his chair. Silvercrest was a mid-tier pack, with old blood and new debts. Whitfield was a name people recognized the way they recognized a stain on a tablecloth. He let her through. The ballroom was an assault. Gold walls, marble floors, a ceiling painted with wolves running through clouds like they owned heaven too. Chandeliers the size of small cars hung overhead, dripping with crystals that broke the light into 1,000 sharp pieces. Music from somewhere. Strings and something deep and rhythmic that Alara felt in her chest before she heard it with her ears. And the wolves. 300 of them, maybe more, dressed in silk and velvet and tailored wool, their human skins polished to a shine, but their animal selves humming underneath, like engines idling. She could feel it, the collective power in the room, pressing against her from every direction, like standing at the bottom of an ocean, made of authority. She was drowning before she'd taken 10 steps. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne and crystal flutes. She took one without slowing down, drank half of it in a single pull, and kept walking. The bubbles burned. Good. She needed something sharp to cut through the fog in her head. She found a spot near a marble column at the far edge of the ballroom, a place where the crowd thinned and the music softened, and she could press her back against something solid and pretend she had a right to be here. The column was cool through the silk of her mother's dress. She leaned into it and breathed. From here, she could see everything without being seen. The she-wolves circling the dance floor in dresses that moved like water. The alpha males standing in clusters, their power rolling off them in waves that made the air taste metallic. The older wolves, the council members and pack leaders, watching from elevated balconies with drinks they never seemed to finish. Everyone was waiting for the same thing. The Alpha King hadn't arrived yet. Alara didn't care about the Alpha King. She was here because her father had given her an invitation with shaking hands and whiskey breath, and somewhere in that gesture was the closest thing to an apology she was ever going to get from him. She was here because her mother's dress fit, and her stepsister said it wouldn't. She was here because sometimes the best response to being told you don't belong is to show up anyway and drink their champagne. She finished the glass, set it on a passing tray, took another. The woman next to her, a tall redhead in silver, glanced over with the kind of look that measured and dismissed in a single sweep. Alara smiled at her. The woman looked away. Alara counted the crystals in the nearest chandelier. She got to 47 before someone said her name in a voice that could cut glass and leave it smiling. Well, look who crawled out of the attic. Megan Harding stood 6 feet away in a dress the color of blood. Her blonde hair swept up in a style that had probably taken 3 hours and 2 professionals. Her smile bright enough to burn. Behind her, a cluster of she-wolves arranged themselves in the formation that pretty girls use when they're about to do something ugly. Alara's hand tightened on her champagne flute. The crystal was thin. She could feel her pulse through it. Megan, loved the dress. Very aggressive. You're wearing your mother's gown. Megan said it the way someone might say you're wearing a Halloween costume to a funeral. Observational. Devastating. That's either brave or sad, and I genuinely cannot tell which. I'll let you know when I decide. Megan stepped closer. The wolves behind her shifted, a choreographed tightening that Alara recognized from years of living in a house where every room had a pecking order, and she was always at the bottom. I'm going to do you a favor, Megan said. I'm going to tell you the truth. Because no one else here will bother. They won't even notice you're here. You have no wolf, Alara. No rank. No scent worth following across a room. You could stand in the center of this dance floor with a spotlight on you, and every unmated alpha in this building would walk around you the way water walks around a stone. You are furniture. You are background noise. You are the girl they seat at the table, near the kitchen, because someone had to fill the chair. The cluster laughed. Small, sharp laughs. The kind that are designed to land like little knives. Alara looked at the champagne in her glass. The bubbles were still rising, tiny and relentless, heading for a surface they'd never get to enjoy. You done? She asked. Megan leaned in, close enough that Alara could smell her perfume, something French and furious, and probably worth more than Eddie's car. No one will ever choose you, Megan said. Not whispered, delivered, with the full weight of someone who believed it so deeply she was doing charity work by sharing. Not tonight, not any night. The Alpha King will walk past you like you're not even here, because to every wolf in this room, you aren't. Something cracked. Not the champagne glass, though Alara's grip was testing that theory. Something older. Something that lived in the space between her chest and her throat, where words went to die. A hairline fracture in the wall she'd built between herself and every version of this speech she'd heard, since she was old enough to understand what wolfless meant. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried since she was 14, the night she'd found her mother's trunk in the attic, and opened it with a screwdriver because the lock was rusted, and nobody had the key, and she needed to know that her mother had been real, had existed, had left something behind besides a daughter nobody wanted. She looked at her left hand. The nail on her index finger was cracked and jagged from prying open that same trunk that morning to get the dress. The nail bed underneath was pink and tender, and doing what bodies do, repairing, rebuilding, refusing to stay broken, even when everything above it insisted on falling apart. She looked back at Megan, at the cluster, at 300 wolves in a golden room who didn't know her name and never would. She set down the champagne glass on the marble ledge behind her and adjusted the emerald sleeve of her mother's gown. She said nothing. It was the loudest thing in the room. Megan waited for a reaction, the way a cat waits at a mouse hole, with total patience and total confidence that something small and afraid would eventually emerge. When nothing did, something shifted behind her eyes. Not anger exactly, confusion. Megan was fluent in cruelty the way concert pianists are fluent in Chopin, and silence was a wrong note she didn't know how to play around. "Did you hear what I said?" "Every word," Alara replied. "Your projection is excellent. Have you considered theater?" One of the wolves behind Megan, a dark-haired girl with cheekbones that could open envelopes, let out a sound that might have been a laugh before she caught it and turned it into a cough. Megan's eyes didn't move from Alara's face. "You think this is funny? I think you spent 20 seconds telling me I'm invisible, and you've now spent 40 more making sure I'm not. So one of us is confused about how this works." The air between them changed temperature. Alara could feel it, not with a wolf's senses, but with the regular human machinery of reading a room that she'd been sharpening since childhood. When you don't have teeth and claws, you develop other instruments. She could read a shift in someone's breathing, the way other wolves read scent markers. She could feel the exact moment when a conversation tipped from performance into something real. Megan's jaw tightened. Just a fraction. A tiny muscular event that cost her nothing but revealed everything. She was not performing anymore. "Stay in your corner, Alara. Don't embarrass yourself." Megan turned and walked away, her pack of wolves following in her wake like expensive wreckage. The dark-haired one glanced back once, not with pity, with something harder to name. Curiosity, maybe. The look you give a thing that should be dead but keeps breathing. Alara exhaled. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the cool marble of the column behind her and counted backward from 10 in French, because her mother used to do that, and some habits are inherited even when the person is gone. Dix. Neuf. Huit. The trembling stopped at quatre. Good enough. She retrieved her champagne glass and discovered it was empty. She didn't remember finishing it, which meant she'd been drinking on autopilot, which meant she needed to slow down or speed up, and she hadn't decided which. The ballroom continued around her as if nothing had happened, because to the ballroom, nothing had. Wolves danced. Wolves talked. Wolves performed the elaborate theater of status that their kind had been rehearsing for centuries. Somewhere, a string quartet started a waltz that sounded like money wrapped in sadness. Alara watched. She was good at watching. 9 years of living in the Harding household had turned her into an expert observer of social ecosystems. She could map a room's power structure in under 3 minutes just by tracking who looked at whom and who looked away first. It was a survival skill, the same way some animals develop camouflage and others develop venom. She had neither fur nor fangs. She had eyes that noticed things. Right now, she noticed that the energy in the room was shifting, a collective tightening, like 300 people simultaneously took a slightly deeper breath. Conversations didn't stop so much as thin out. Glances traveled toward the main entrance with increasing frequency. He was coming. The Alpha King. Alara had never seen him in person. She'd seen photographs, the carefully managed images that appeared in the kind of publications that arrive at houses like the Hardings, and never at houses like the one she actually lived in. In those photographs, Dominic Ashford looked like a man who had been assembled from parts that were each, individually, intimidating, and then combined into something that shouldn't be legal. She didn't care about seeing him. Not really. She cared about the third glass of champagne she'd just acquired, and the fact that her mother's heels were already forming blisters on both pinky toes, and she had an hour and 40 minutes left on Eddie's clock. But the room cared. The room cared enormously, and when you're standing inside something that's holding its breath, you hold yours too. The main doors opened. Not dramatically. Doors don't need drama when the person walking through them carries enough for the entire building. Dominic Ashford entered the Royal Lichen Ball 40 minutes late, and the room rearranged itself around him the way iron filings rearrange around a magnet, instantly, involuntarily, and with complete surrender to a force none of them could resist. He was tall. That was the first thing. Not just tall the way some men are tall, which is a measurement. He was tall the way a building is tall, in a way that restructured the space around him and made the ceiling seem lower. Dark hair, cut short, the kind of cut that says I don't think about my appearance and is lying. A jaw that looked like it had been designed by someone who wanted to win an argument about geometry. Dark suit, no tie, the collar open just enough to show the edge of something, a scar or a tattoo or a shadow that disappeared below the fabric. But it was his eyes that did the damage. They were amber, deep and light at the same time, lit from somewhere behind the iris, as if something was burning in a back room that he kept locked. Those eyes swept the ballroom with the efficiency of a man inventorying a space for threats, not beauty. 6 men flanked him, his personal guard, each one the size of a small emergency. They moved with him the way satellites move with a planet, pulled by gravity they didn't question. Alara watched from her column and sipped her champagne. The bubbles had gone flat. She drank it anyway. Flat champagne was still champagne, and she was in no position to be choosy. The unmated she-wolves mobilized. It was almost beautiful in its coordination, like watching a nature documentary about mating rituals, except everyone was wearing heels, and the stakes included political alliances and territorial mergers. Necks tilted in submission, sense amplified. One woman actually curtsied, which Alara found so absurdly old-fashioned that she almost choked on her flat champagne. Meghan was among them. Of course she was. She positioned herself along the king's projected path with the strategic precision of someone who had studied the floor plan in advance, which she probably had. Her red dress caught the light. Her chin was angled at exactly the right degree of confident submission. She was perfect in every way that this world measured perfection. Alara felt something watching Meghan, and it took her a moment to identify it, because it was not jealousy, and it was not anger. It was exhaustion, the deep, bone-level kind that comes from watching someone perform a version of womanhood that you were never equipped to compete in, and never wanted to, but were punished for anyway. She turned away from the spectacle and studied the marble column behind her. It had a small crack running through it at eye level, a flaw in the stone that someone had filled with gold, the way the Japanese fix broken pottery by making the repair part of the design. Kintsugi, they called it, the art of valuable damage. She ran her finger along the gold line. The Alpha King was moving through the crowd. She could track his progress without looking, just by the sound of conversations dying and restarting in his wake like a wave passing through grass. Voices got louder when he was far, and quieter when he was near, a proximity alarm built from social anxiety. He passed the woman who curtsied. He passed a pair of twin she-wolves who had coordinated their dresses in complementary shades of blue. He passed a woman whose perfume was so strong it had its own weather system. He passed them all, with the expression of a man walking through a parking lot, not rude, but entirely unengaged. His wolf, she'd heard, was dormant. The stories varied depending on who told them and how drunk they were. Some said the king's wolf went silent after the Northern Campaign, the 3-month territorial conflict that ended with the kind of victory that left the winners looking haunted. Others said his wolf had been quiet since birth, that the most powerful alpha in 7 generations was also the most reluctant, that the beast inside him was not sleeping but refusing. Alara didn't know which story was true. She suspected all of them were, which is usually how it works with complicated people and simple narratives. He passed Meghan, walked past her without a flicker of recognition, without even the courtesy of a glance, as if she were a decorative pillar he'd already catalogued and dismissed. Meghan's perfect angle faltered by a single degree. Nobody else would have noticed. Alara noticed because noticing was what she had, instead of a wolf. And then something happened that Alara would spend the rest of her life trying to understand. The Alpha King stopped walking. Not slowed, not paused. Stopped, the way a clock stops, completely and without negotiation. His entire body locked in place mid-stride, 1 foot forward, his weight suspended in a position that should have looked awkward, but instead looked like a man who had just been struck by something invisible and enormous. His guards reacted first. 3 of them shifted positions with the efficient alarm of professionals who are paid to assume the worst. One reached for the king's arm and stopped when the king's hand came up, a flat palm that said don't. The room noticed. 300 wolves noticed simultaneously, because wolves are built to notice when the most powerful person in the room stops doing what he was doing, and the silence that followed was the kind of silence that has weight. Dominic Ashford's amber eyes were fixed on a point across the ballroom. Alara was studying her cracked fingernail, the one she'd broken on her mother's trunk, and thinking about keratin and how the body rebuilds itself from protein and stubbornness, when she became aware that someone was looking at her. Not at her column, not at her section of the room, at her, with the specific, targeted intensity of a searchlight, finding the one thing it was built to find. She looked up. The Alpha King was staring at her from 30 feet away, with an expression that she had no framework to interpret. His amber eyes were wide, the pupils blown so large they'd nearly swallowed the color, and something behind those eyes was moving, waking, rising, a tectonic shift happening in real time behind a human face. His wolf. His supposedly dormant, supposedly dead, supposedly broken wolf was doing something it hadn't done in 3 years. It was screaming. Not the kind of scream that comes from pain, the kind that comes from recognition, the kind that a locked door makes when the right key finally turns, after years of wrong ones. It was a sound that nobody in the room could hear, but everybody in the room could feel, a subsonic vibration that rattled champagne glasses and made the chandeliers sway. Alara stood very still. Her champagne glass was empty. Her fingernail was still broken. Her mother's dress was slightly too tight across the shoulders, and the blisters on her toes were making solid progress towards something meaningful. The most powerful wolf in the kingdom was looking at her like she was the answer to a question he'd forgotten he'd asked. She thought, very clearly, and with the particular calm that descends when reality becomes so absurd that panic doesn't know where to land, that there must be someone standing behind her. She turned around. There was nobody behind her, just a marble column with a gold crack running through it. She turned back. He was still looking at her, and now he was walking toward her, and the crowd was parting before him like they were made of water, and his 6 guards were following at a distance that suggested they had no idea what was happening, but were contractually obligated to be nearby when it did. 20 feet. 15. 10. Alara's heart was doing something architecturally unsound. Each beat landed harder than the last, as if her chest had decided to renovate itself on a deadline. The champagne was making her ears warm. The blisters were making her feet hot. Her mother's dress was making her brave, or at least making her too proud to run in it. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the scar below his collar, which was definitely a scar and not a tattoo, a thin white line that ran from beneath his left ear to somewhere below the fabric. Close enough that she could smell him, pine, and something electric, like the air after lightning, like the space between a match being struck and the flame catching. His wolf was so present now that Alara could feel it pressing against his skin from the inside, a living thing trying to get closer to her through a barrier of bone and manners. She didn't have a wolf to answer it. She had nothing. She had a green dress and a broken nail and 2 blisters, and the kind of stubbornness that comes from being underestimated for 22 years. He looked at her. She looked at him. 300 wolves looked at both of them. The string quartet had stopped playing because even the musicians could feel that the room had shifted into a key that no instrument could match. Dominic Ashford, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, conqueror of the border war, the wolf whose power had reshaped the political map of the continent, opened his mouth. "You're standing on my foot," Alara said. He blinked. It was possibly the first time in his adult life that someone had spoken to him first, in a situation where he was clearly about to say something important. He looked down. His left shoe, which cost more than her car ride, was resting on the hem of her mother's emerald gown, pinning her in place. Something happened to his face. Not a smile exactly. A crack in the surface. like the gold line in the column behind her, a flaw that made the whole thing more real. He didn't step back. He knelt. The Alpha King knelt on the marble floor of the grand ballroom, in front of 300 witnesses, and his own security detail, and a girl in a 9-year-old dress with no wolf, and with hands that had ended wars and signed treaties, and broken things that could not be unbroken. He carefully lifted the emerald silk from beneath his shoe, and held it as if it were made of something more valuable than fabric. The silence in the room was so absolute that Alara could hear her own heartbeat, and, underneath it, the sound of Megan's champagne glass hitting the marble floor and shattering into 1,000 tiny bright pieces. He looked up at her from one knee. "Mine?" he said. The word didn't sound like a claim. It sounded like a discovery, like a man finding a door in a wall he'd given up searching years ago, like the lock turning, and the hinges moving, and the light pouring in from whatever had been waiting on the other side. Alara's hands were shaking again, both of them this time. She pressed them against the sides of her mother's dress and felt the silk tremble with her. "You don't know my name," she said. "I know what you are." "I don't have a wolf." "I know." "Then what could you possibly want with me?" He stood. The movement was fluid in a way that shouldn't have been possible for someone his size, as if gravity had agreed to make an exception. He was so close now that she had to tilt her chin up to meet his eyes, and she saw the wolf in them, awake and certain, and looking at her with the absolute conviction of something that had found its home. "Everything," he said. "I want everything." Behind him, the ballroom was rearranging itself around a truth that nobody had predicted and nobody could undo. The she-wolves in their designer gowns were recalculating. The alphas in their clusters were exchanging glances that carried the weight of political realignments. The council members on the balconies were setting down their unfinished drinks. Megan was standing in a puddle of champagne and broken crystal, her red dress spotted with wine, her perfect composure developing hairline fractures that were spreading across her expression like frost across a window. Ilara's father was somewhere in the room. She could feel it, the particular quality of silence that Gerald Whitfield occupied, the shape of a man who had once been present, and then retreated so far inside himself that he left only an outline. She looked at the king's hand. It was extended toward her, palm up, an offering, and an invitation, and a challenge, all in 5 fingers. She took it. His hand was warm, not the ordinary warmth of a living body, but the kind of heat that comes from something burning internally, something that had been generating warmth in a closed space for years, with nothing to warm and nowhere to send it. His fingers closed around hers, and the fit was ridiculous, his hand engulfing hers, the way a continent engulfs an island, but the pressure was careful, calibrated, as if he was holding something he'd been told was fragile, and didn't believe it, but was taking no chances. They stood there, 2 people holding hands in the center of an undone room, surrounded by the debris of 300 recalculated expectations. The string quartet started playing again. Nobody had told them to. The cellist just picked up her bow and began, and the others followed, and the music that filled the room was something slow and unresolved, a melody that didn't know its ending yet. "You should know something," Ilara said. "Tell me." "I came here tonight because my stepsister told me I was invisible, because my father gave me an invitation with guilty hands, because this dress belonged to a woman who didn't deserve what happened to her, and I wanted someone to see it in the light." She paused. His amber eyes didn't waver. "I didn't come here for you. I didn't come here to be chosen. I came here because everyone said I shouldn't, and I have a problem with being told what I shouldn't do." Something moved behind his expression, deeper than amusement, warmer than respect. He looked at her the way you look at a fire when you've been cold for a long time, not with gratitude, but with recognition. "This warmth existed before me. It will exist after me, but right now, it is here." "Then you should also know something," he said. "My wolf has been silent for 3 years. I came here tonight because my advisors told me I had to, because a king without a mate is a question that his enemies will eventually try to answer. I was going to walk through this room, shake hands, drink something I didn't want, and leave." He looked at their joined hands. "And then you happened." Ilara let that sit. She let it sit the way the instructions said not to, which is to say, she didn't rush to fill the space with something clever or self-deprecating, or grateful. She let the moment have its weight. I don't have a wolf, she said again. Your council won't accept me. Your pack won't accept me. Half the people in this room have daughters who were raised for this, and I was raised in a house where they removed the mirrors so I wouldn't get ideas. My council doesn't choose my mate. My pack doesn't choose my mate. My wolf chose you before I crossed this room. And my wolf has never been wrong about anything, which is inconvenient, because it means I've never been right when I disagreed with it. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. The music continued, and around them, the ballroom began to resume its rhythms, slowly, and with the cautious energy of a building that has just experienced a seismic event and isn't sure if there will be aftershocks. People began to talk again, in whispers first, and then in voices that pretended to be normal, but were pitched with the particular frequency of people who are talking about you while standing close enough for you to hear. Ilara heard fragments: wolfless, Whitfield, scandal, mother, half-breed, blood. She let them pass through her, the way rain passes through a sieve, touching everything and holding nothing. The king's hand tightened on hers. Not possessive, protective. The difference was in the direction of the grip, pulling her closer rather than holding her in place. Walk with me, he said. Where? Out. Out of the ballroom? Out of the room where everyone is staring at you and deciding what you're worth, based on things that have nothing to do with your worth. She looked at him, this enormous, scar-carrying, amber-eyed man who had just knelt on a marble floor for a girl in a borrowed dress and was now asking her to leave with him as if it were the most natural thing in the world and not the most insane political event of the decade. Her blisters were making compelling arguments for sitting down. Her champagne intake was making the room slightly softer at the edges. Her mother's dress was warm against her skin, warmer than silk should be, as if the fabric remembered something that Ilara's body was only now learning. I have a car waiting, she said. I paid for 2 hours. I've used about 40 minutes. His mouth did the thing again. The crack, the gold in the marble. I have a palace. I own it. We can take as long as we want. She almost laughed. Not a polite laugh, the real kind. The kind that comes from the absurd gap between your life 5 minutes ago and your life right now. Okay, she said. Okay, let's walk. They walked, together, through the center of the ballroom, between the parted halves of a world that was watching them rewrite its rules in real time. His hand held hers. Her blisters protested with every step. The emerald silk of her mother's dress moved around her legs like something alive, like something that had been waiting to move through this room for 9 years. She caught Megan's eye as they passed. Megan was standing in the same spot, the champagne stain spreading across the marble at her feet, like a map of territory she was losing. Her face was doing something complicated, a calculation that kept returning an error, a formula that had always balanced before and was now refusing to solve. Megan's mouth opened. Ilara didn't wait to hear what came out. Some words lose their power when you stop listening, and she had stopped listening to Megan a long time ago. She just hadn't known it until now. They passed Ilara's father near the east wall. Gerald Whitfield was standing with a drink he wasn't drinking, wearing a suit that didn't fit, occupying a space in the room the way a piece of old furniture occupies a room, present and purposeless. His eyes were wet. His mouth was working around words that wouldn't come. Ilara looked at him, not with anger, not with forgiveness, with the particular clarity that arrives when you realize a person's power over you has a shelf life and it just expired. She didn't speak to him. She didn't need to. Gerald Whitfield had spent 9 years not looking at his daughter. Tonight, he couldn't look away. That was enough. That was exactly enough. The palace corridors were quieter, the noise of the ballroom falling away behind them like a tide retreating from a shore. The walls here were dark stone, older than the gilded ballroom, rough cut and honest. Torches in iron brackets instead of crystal chandeliers. This was the real palace, the bones beneath the cosmetics. His guards followed at a distance. Ilara counted 6 sets of footsteps behind them, even and measured and professional. Your guards are following us. They follow me everywhere. Even into conversations? They're trained to not listen. That's not how ears work. The gold crack in his expression widened. You're very practical for someone who just got claimed by the Alpha King. You're very casual for someone who just upended his entire political future By claiming a wolfless girl he met 4 minutes ago. 7 minutes? You were counting. My wolf was counting. I was busy trying to remember how to breathe. They reached a balcony, he pushed open a heavy door and the night poured in, cold and clean and full of stars. The balcony overlooked the mountains, a vast sweep of pine and shadow and sky that made the ballroom feel like a very pretty cage. Alara stepped out. The air hit her skin, and she realized she'd been holding heat in her chest for the last hour, a clenched warmth that she hadn't known was there until it loosened. She gripped the stone railing and breathed. The mountains were enormous and indifferent and beautiful. They'll come for you, Dominic said. He stood beside her, not touching, giving her the railing and the air and the view, without crowding any of them. The council, the bloodline purists. Megan's family has connections. They'll challenge the bond. What bond? I don't have a wolf to bond with. The bond isn't between wolves. It's between souls. The wolf just recognizes it first. She looked at him. His profile against the starlight was sharp and certain, the kind of face that belongs on coins or wanted posters, depending on which side of history you're standing on. Souls, she repeated. You don't believe in souls? I believe in things I can see and things I can survive. Souls are in neither category. He turned to her then, fully, and the amber in his eyes was so bright in the darkness that she understood, viscerally and without argument, that the light wasn't reflected. It was generated. Something inside this man was burning with a steady, permanent flame, and it had just found its oxygen. Then believe in this, he said. My wolf was dead. Not sleeping. Not resting. Dead. For 3 years I have felt nothing. Chosen nothing. Wanted nothing. And then you looked up at me with champagne on your breath and a broken fingernail and a dress that smells like cedar, and a woman I will never meet, and my wolf came back from the dead. Not slowly. All at once. Like a heart restarting. Like a light turning on in every room of a house that's been dark for so long, the neighbors assumed it was empty. Alara's throat tightened. Her eyes burned. She looked at the mountains. My mother died when I was 13, she said. They said it was an accident. It wasn't. She made a choice. A choice I have spent 9 years refusing to understand, because understanding it would mean accepting that she left me on purpose, and I have not been willing to accept that. She hadn't said that out loud before. Not to anyone. Not to the therapist her father sent her to once before deciding it was too expensive. Not to the cracked mirror in her pillowcase. Not to Eddie in the hired car. She said it to a king she'd known for 12 minutes on a balcony, overlooking mountains that didn't care. He didn't flinch. He didn't offer comfort or sympathy or any of the reflexive softnesses that people deploy when they hear something they don't know how to hold. He just stood there, present, solid, like a wall. Like a wall that catches rather than blocks. That dress fits you, he said. 3 words. Not about her mother's death. Not about the trauma she'd just handed him like a live grenade. About the dress. About the present tense. About the fact that she was here, wearing it, standing in the night air, alive and furious and unclaimed by anything except this moment. She looked at him, this king, this impossible man with his impossible wolf and his impossible claim. What happens now? She asked. Now you decide, he said. My wolf chose you. My kingdom will challenge you. My council will test you. There are people in that ballroom right now making phone calls and drafting objections and planning how to undo what happened tonight. You will face every one of them. And you? I will be standing next to you when you do. She let out a breath she'd been holding since she was 13. I don't need you to stand next to me. I've been standing alone for 9 years. I know, he said. That's why my wolf chose you. Not because you need a king, because you don't. The stars were sharp overhead. The mountains were dark and patient and old. The ballroom behind them was filled with wolves who were just beginning to understand that the world had changed shape while they were busy performing for it. Alara looked at Dominic Ashford, Alpha King, and saw not a title or a throne or a political complication. She saw a man who had been quiet for 3 years and had just found his voice, and his voice had said her name. Not her actual name. He still didn't know it. He'd called her mine, which was presumptuous and old-fashioned and exactly the kind of word that should have made her angry. It made her brave instead. Alara, she said. My name is Alara. Dominic. I know who you are. You know what they say about me. You don't know who I am. Not yet. That sounds like it's going to take a while. I have time. I own a palace. She didn't laugh. She did something better. She smiled, and the smile was real, and it was the first real smile she had worn in a year, and it changed the geometry of her face from something sharp and guarded into something open and dangerous, and entirely herself. He saw it. His wolf saw it. The sound it made inside his chest was not a howl. It was a welcome. Okay, Dominic, Alara said. Show me your palace. He offered his arm. She took it. Her blisters screamed. She ignored them. Pain was a language she was fluent in, and she had decided to stop letting it have the last word. They walked back through the heavy door, into the corridor, toward the sound of music and politics and 300 wolves who were about to learn that the girl with no wolf was now the most important person in the kingdom. Behind them, the mountains held their silence. The stars kept burning. The night air settled where they'd been standing and found it warmer than before. Inside the ballroom, Megan Harding picked up the pieces of her champagne glass one by one, carefully, as if assembling evidence for a case she hadn't finished building. Inside the hired car, Eddie checked his watch and started the engine. His passenger had been gone for 90 minutes. He'd wait the remaining 30 because a deal was a deal, and because the girl in the green dress had looked like someone on her way to something, and Eddie had been driving long enough to recognize the difference between a passenger going somewhere and a passenger arriving. Inside the marble column, the gold crack held its line. Damage made valuable, breakage made beautiful, the flaw that made the whole thing worth looking at. Inside her mother's dress, against her skin, the cedar scent was fading, replaced slowly and permanently by the smell of pine and lightning and a future she hadn't planned for and couldn't have imagined, and was walking toward with both eyes open and both hands full. Alara's phone buzzed at 6:14 in the morning with a text from a number she didn't recognize. 3 words. My wolf says good morning. She stared at the screen for 11 seconds, set the phone face down on the nightstand, and pressed her face into the pillow to muffle a sound that was either a laugh or a scream. She hadn't decided yet. She was back in her room at the Harding house, the room that wasn't really a room, more of a repurposed storage closet at the end of the upstairs hallway, with a window that overlooked the parking area and a ceiling that sloped at the kind of angle that made standing up fully a privilege, reserved for the center, 3 feet. Her mother's dress hung on the back of the door, the emerald silk catching the gray morning light and looking impossibly out of place against the particle board door, like finding a diamond in a sock drawer. Last night had happened. She kept checking the way you check your pocket for your keys when the thing you're looking for seems too important to still be where you left it. The ballroom, the champagne, Megan's speech, the king on his knee, his hand around hers, the balcony, the stars, the word mine spoken like a door opening. The walk back through the corridor while 6 guards pretended not to exist, the moment at the palace gate when he let go of her hand, and the loss of heat was so specific, so localized, that she could still feel the ghost of his fingers against hers, like a thermal imprint. She'd gotten back in Eddie's car with 4 minutes to spare. Eddie looked at her in the rearview mirror and said, "Good night?" And she said, "I honestly have no idea." And Eddie nodded, because that was an answer that required no follow-up. Now it was morning, and her phone had a text from the Alpha King, and the house was beginning to stir beneath her. Claire's heels on the hardwood downstairs, the coffee machine grinding through its daily negotiation with existence, and somewhere, Megan's voice, low and tight, and talking to someone on the phone. Alara got up, got dressed. Ordinary clothes, jeans and a sweater that had been washed so many times it had achieved a texture beyond softness, a kind of cellular surrender. She went downstairs because she lived here, and food was downstairs, and hunger doesn't care about political earthquakes. The kitchen was a crime scene of tension disguised as breakfast. Claire stood at the counter pouring coffee with the precision of a surgeon and the expression of a woman who had received bad news and was metabolizing it into something she could weaponize. Gerald sat at the table with the newspaper, though he wasn't reading it. He was using it as a shield, which was its primary function in this household. Megan was on the phone. She ended the call when Alara walked in, which told Alara everything she needed to know about the subject of the call. "Good morning," Alara said to the room in general. the way you'd say good morning to a room full of unexploded ordnance. Claire turned. She was a beautiful woman in the way that well-maintained things are beautiful. Polished surfaces and sharp edges. Nothing soft, nothing accidental. She looked at Alara with the expression she reserved for problems she hadn't anticipated, which was to say, with the beginning stages of a plan. Sit down, Alara. Alara poured herself coffee first. It was a small act of defiance, but small acts were the only kind available in this kitchen. She sat, she sipped. The coffee was terrible. It was always terrible. We need to discuss what happened last night, Claire said. What happened last night? Gerald asked from behind his newspaper, and the three women in the kitchen looked at him with three different varieties of contempt. Your daughter, Megan said, loading the word with enough venom to kill something small, was claimed by the Alpha King. Gerald's newspaper lowered 1 inch. His eyes appeared over the top, red-rimmed and guilty. He looked at Alara. He looked at Claire. He put the newspaper back up. Don't you dare hide behind that, Claire said, and she crossed the kitchen and pulled the newspaper out of his hands with a single sharp motion that left him holding nothing and looking at everyone. You gave her the invitation. You snuck it to her behind my back, and now the entire kingdom is talking about the wolfless Whitfield girl who seduced the Alpha King. I didn't seduce anyone, Alara said. I was standing next to a column minding my own business. You were wearing that dress. My mother's dress. Yes. The room temperature dropped 3 degrees. Mentioning Nora Whitfield in Claire's kitchen was like mentioning a previous restaurant to a chef. It was technically not an insult, but it was received as one. The Council of Alphas has already initiated a formal challenge, Claire continued, redirecting her energy from Alara's dead mother to the more productive territory of political consequences. The Ashford bond must be verified by the Council before any mate claim is recognized. And since you have no wolf, there is nothing to verify. The claim will be dismissed. Alara sipped her terrible coffee. You hear me? Dismissed. Rejected. Thrown out. And then we'll all have to live with the embarrassment of a Whitfield girl making a spectacle of herself at the royal ball. I didn't make a spectacle. The king knelt. I was just standing there. Megan's chair scraped against the floor as she stood. You did something. You had to have done something. Wolves don't just claim people for no reason. He walked past every eligible she-wolf in that room, past me, past girls who have trained their entire lives for this, and he stopped at you, the girl with no wolf, the girl who showed up in a dead woman's hand-me-downs. Explain it. I can't explain it. Try. Megan, I was counting ceiling crystals and drinking flat champagne. He stopped. His wolf woke up. He knelt. Those are the facts. I didn't plan it. I didn't want it. I didn't even know it was possible. You didn't want it, Megan repeated, and her voice was doing something it had never done before, cracking. Not dramatically, not performatively. The real kind of crack that happens when someone's certainty about how the world works takes a hit. It wasn't reinforced for. Alara looked at her stepsister, at the girl who had spent 22 years being everything this world asked her to be. Powerful wolf, beautiful face, perfect submission angle, noble blood, strategic alliances, and had watched the one prize she'd been raised to win get handed to someone who wasn't even trying to play the game. For 1 second, less than a second, something that was not cruelty passed between them. Something that almost looked like grief. Then Megan's face closed. The crack sealed. The polish returned. The council will reject the claim, Megan said. And when they do, you'll be right back here where you belong. She left the kitchen. Her footsteps on the stairs were even and precise. The footsteps of a woman who would rather break her own ankles than let anyone hear her stumble. Claire followed, pausing at the doorway to deliver a final look at Gerald that contained an entire marriage's worth of blame, compressed into a single glance. Gerald and Alara sat alone in the kitchen. The coffee machine gurgled. The newspaper lay on the table between them like evidence. Dad! He flinched. He always flinched when she called him that, as if the word was a small stone thrown at a window he was trying to keep intact. Did you know this would happen? He shook his head. His hands were around his coffee mug, both of them, holding on. I just wanted you to see the inside of something beautiful. Your mother would have wanted that. My mother would have wanted a lot of things. I know. He picked up his mug and left, and Alara sat alone in the kitchen with terrible coffee, and a buzzing phone, and the beginning of a day that was going to be either the best or worst of her life, with equal probability, and no way to tell which until it was already happening. Her phone buzzed again. Same number. One word this time. Breakfast? She typed back, already having some. His reply was immediate. Not what I asked. She stared at the screen. Her thumbs hovered over the keyboard. In the hallway, she could hear Claire making calls, the sharp, efficient sound of a woman mobilizing resources against a problem named Alara. She typed, "Where?" The address he sent was the palace. She finished her terrible coffee, rinsed the cup, put on shoes that didn't have blisters in them yet, and walked out the front door of the Harding house for the second time in 12 hours. The morning was cold. The sky was the color of a decision. She didn't have a car. She didn't have a wolf. She didn't have a plan. She had an address and a text from a king whose wolf had woken up for her. She called Eddie. "This is becoming a habit," he said. "Can you do one more trip?" "Same rate." "Same rate? Where to?" she told him. There was a silence on the line that lasted long enough to have its own weather. "The palace," Eddie said. "The palace. You're full of surprises. Green dress." He picked her up 14 minutes later. She got in the back seat and watched the Harding house shrink in the rear window, getting smaller with every second, until it was just a roof and a chimney and then nothing at all. The drive to the palace felt different in daylight. The estates along the hill road were visible now, their gardens and gates and the particular architecture of generational wealth on display. The road climbed, the trees thickened, the air through Eddie's cracked window smelled like pine and morning, and the kind of cold that wakes up your skin. The palace gates were different in daylight, too. Last night they'd been theatrical, torchlit, part of a performance. Now they were just gates, iron and stone, manned by guards who checked her name against a list and found it there, which surprised her more than it should have. "Ilara Whitfield, you're expected." Expected. The word felt new. Eddie drove up the long approach and parked where he was told to park, and Ilara got out and looked at the obsidian palace in the morning light, and it was not beautiful. It was old. It was scarred. It was built from black stone that had weathered centuries of rain and war and politics, and every mark was visible, every crack, every repair. It was not a palace that hid its history. It was a palace that wore it. She liked it. A man met her at the entrance. Not a guard, something else. Trim, precise, carrying a tablet and wearing the expression of someone whose job description had recently been revised without his input. "Miss Whitfield, I'm Simon, the king's chief advisor. He's asked me to bring you to the East Wing." "Good morning, Simon." Simon looked at her jeans, at her sweater, at the ordinary shoes on her feet that were neither heels nor particularly clean. He blinked, adjusted something internal, and offered a professional nod. "Good morning, this way, please." He led her through corridors that smelled like stone and old wood, and the particular polish used on floors that have been walked on by important people for generations. She memorized the turns. Left, right, through a hall with portraits of wolves who all looked like they'd been asked to hold still and resented it. The East Wing opened into a room that was clearly not a formal dining room. It was a kitchen, an actual kitchen, large and warm, with a wooden table in the center, and windows that looked out over the mountain range, and a stove where something was cooking that smelled like eggs and honesty. Dominic Ashford stood at that stove in a gray t-shirt and dark trousers, barefoot on the stone floor, cooking. The Alpha King was cooking her breakfast. He turned when she entered, and his face did the thing she was beginning to recognize. The crack, the gold line, the flaw that made everything real. His amber eyes found her, and the wolf behind them did something that she felt in her chest. A low, warm, subsonic hum, like a furnace igniting in a cold house. "You came," he said. "You invited me. I half expected you to ignore it. I considered it. But my coffee at home is terrible, and I'm curious about what the Alpha King makes for breakfast." He turned back to the stove. "Eggs. The answer is eggs. I'm not a complicated cook." "Good. I'm not a complicated eater." She sat at the wooden table. Simon hovered at the door, realized he was not needed, and disappeared with the fluid retreat of a man who had perfected the art of strategic absence. Dominic put a plate in front of her. Scrambled eggs, toast, A cup of coffee that smelled like it had been made by someone who understood that coffee was a serious matter. He sat across from her with his own plate, and for a moment they just ate, in silence, in the morning light, with the mountains visible through the windows, and the world outside building its objections. "The council has filed a challenge," he said, between bites. "I know. My stepmother told me. She's very excited about it. They'll want a blood test, a lineage verification, a wolf confirmation." "I don't have a wolf, Dominic. A confirmation will confirm that." "I know." "So what happens?" He set down his fork. His hands on the table were large and steady and covered in small scars that told stories she hadn't heard yet. "What happens is that I am the Alpha King. My claim supersedes council protocol. They can challenge the bond, but they cannot void a king's claim without a tribunal, and a tribunal requires a majority of the 7 alpha houses. Right now I have the loyalty of 4, maybe 5. Maybe. Spencer Whitfield is unpredictable. Spencer Whitfield is my uncle." His eyebrows rose. "1 fraction of 1 degree. Your mother's brother?" "My mother's brother. We haven't spoken in 8 years. He didn't approve of her marriage to my father. He didn't approve of me. He believes half-breeds dilute the bloodline. And he's one of the 7 alpha house leaders." "He is. That's complicated. That's my family." They looked at each other across the table. Eggs and coffee, and politics, and a bond that neither of them had asked for, and both of them were beginning to understand, could not be ignored. "There's something else," Dominic said. "Something the council will use if they can't void the claim through lineage." "What?" "The right of proving. An old law, rarely invoked. It states that any mate of a king who does not carry a wolf must prove her worth to the kingdom through a trial set by the council." "A trial?" 3 trials, actually. Physical, strategic, and emotional. Each designed by a different council member. Designed to fail. Designed to be difficult. Whether they're designed to fail depends on who designs them. Alara picked up her coffee. It was excellent. It was, without exaggeration, the best coffee she had ever tasted, and she resented it slightly because it made it harder to be angry. "So I have to prove I deserve to stand next to you. You don't have to prove anything to me, but I have to prove it to everyone else." "Yes." She drank her coffee. She looked at the mountains through the window. She thought about Megan saying, "No one will ever choose you," and Claire saying the claim will be dismissed, and her uncle Spencer, who hadn't spoken to her in 8 years because her blood was wrong, and every voice in her life that had measured her and found her lacking. "When do the trials start?" she asked. "The council meets in 3 days. They'll set the terms." 3 days. 3 days. She set down the cup. "Then I have 3 days to prepare for something I don't understand, designed by people who want me to fail, to prove I deserve a bond I didn't ask for, with a man I met 12 hours ago." "That's an accurate summary. And if I fail?" "The bond is dissolved. The claim is void. You go back to your life." She thought about her life. The storage closet bedroom, the terrible coffee, the house without mirrors, the father who couldn't look at her, the mother who chose to leave. "And if I pass, then you are the queen," Dominic said, and the word fell between them on the wooden table, like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples in every direction that neither of them could predict. Ilara looked at the Alpha King, at his gray t-shirt, and his bare feet, and his excellent coffee, and his amber eyes, where a wolf was watching her with the patient, absolute certainty of something that had already decided, and was waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. "I need to make a phone call," she said. "To whom?" "My uncle, Spencer Whitfield." "You said you haven't spoken in 8 years." "I haven't. But he's one of the 7. And if the trials are going to be designed by people who want me to fail, I need at least one person in that room who might want me to survive." "He doesn't approve of you." "He doesn't approve of what I am. That's different from wanting me dead. He loved my mother. Whatever he thinks of half-breeds, whatever he thinks of my father, he loved her, and I'm going to walk into his house wearing her face and ask him to remember that." Dominic studied her. The amber eyes were steady, warm, reading her with the particular attention of someone who was discovering, in real time, that the person in front of him was more than he'd calculated and less than he'd feared. "You're going to use your resemblance to your dead mother as emotional leverage against a man who hasn't spoken to you since you were 14. Yes. That's cold. That's survival. The gold crack in his expression opened into something that was almost, very nearly, unmistakably a smile. My wolf chose well, he said. Elara finished her coffee, set the cup down, looked at the mountains one more time, looked at the king one more time. I need to go, she said. I need to go to my uncle before the council meets. I need to make him remember who my mother was, and decide if that's enough to let her daughter live. Take my car. I have Eddie. Who is Eddie? My driver. He charges by the hour and doesn't ask questions. I can provide a driver who doesn't charge. I like Eddie. He's uncomplicated. Dominic stood when she stood, walked her to the door. At the threshold, he stopped and she stopped, and they stood in the doorway with the morning light falling between them, like a curtain that neither of them pulled aside. Elara. Yes. Whatever happens with the council, whatever happens with the trials, whatever happens with Spencer, and the blood laws, and the wolves who think your worth is measured by what you carry inside you. He paused. His wolf pressed against the inside of his expression, and she could see it, feel it, that warm subsonic hum that bridged the space between them. You already passed. My wolf knew it in the first second. Everything else is just paperwork. She looked at him, looked at the wolf behind his eyes, looked at the scar on his neck and the barefoot warmth of him, and the kitchen behind him where their breakfast plates still sat on the table. Paperwork, she said. Bureaucracy. The ancient enemy of everything real. She left before she did something impractical, like staying. Eddie was waiting in the car. He looked at her in the rearview mirror as she climbed in. Back to the house? No, she said. I need to go somewhere else. She gave him an address she hadn't spoken aloud in 8 years. The house of Spencer Whitfield, alpha of the Ashwick line, her mother's brother, the man who had looked at a 14-year-old girl at a funeral and said you should never have been born, and meant it as a statement of biological fact rather than personal cruelty, which somehow made it worse. Eddie drove. The road left the palace grounds and headed north, into the older territories, where the trees grew closer together, and the houses grew farther apart, and the wolves who lived there had roots so deep they'd forgotten what the surface looked like. Elara leaned her head against the window. The glass was cold. Her mother's face looked back at her, reflected and transparent, superimposed on the passing trees like a ghost hitchhiking on the landscape. She had 3 days. 3 days to convince a man who hated what she was to protect who she was. 3 days to prepare for trials she didn't understand. 3 days to decide if she wanted to be a queen. The road curved. The trees closed in. The ghost in the window kept pace. Eddie. Yeah. Have you ever done something that felt completely insane, but also completely inevitable? Eddie thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. I married my wife after knowing her for 3 weeks. How did that work out? 22 years and counting. She still scares me. I still show up. Elara smiled. The second real smile in less than 24 hours. She was on a streak. That's encouraging, she said. Or a warning, Eddie replied. Depends on how you look at it. She looked at it from the back seat of a hired car, heading toward a confrontation 8 years in the making, wearing a sweater that had surrendered to its own softness, carrying no wolf, and no weapon, and no plan beyond the shape of her mother's face, and the stubborn, ridiculous, entirely unreasonable belief that sometimes the thing nobody expects you to do is exactly the thing you were born to do. The car drove north. The mountains grew larger. The morning grew older. 3 days. Spencer Whitfield lived at the end of a road that stopped pretending to be maintained, about 2 miles before it reached his gate. The car bounced over ruts and roots, and Eddie muttered things under his breath that Elara pretended not to hear. The trees here were old growth, massive trunks with bark that looked like the skin of something ancient that had decided to stand still and watch the world happen around it. The gate was iron, rusted in places but solid everywhere, and it opened before Eddie reached it because Spencer Whitfield knew someone was coming. Wolves always knew. Their territory was their nervous system. Every tree root and bird call and tire crunch feeding information to a mind that processed the world the way radar processes sky. You didn't surprise a wolf on his own land. You arrived, and he decided whether to let you in. He was letting her in. The house was stone, low-slung, built into the hillside the way a bunker is built, designed for endurance rather than admiration. Smoke came from a chimney. A dog that was definitely not a dog watched from the porch with yellow eyes. "Wait here," Alara told Eddie. "How long?" "I have no idea." "Meter's running." "I know." She got out. The air was different here. Thinner, colder, flavored with pine resin and altitude and the particular mineral smell of water running over ancient rock somewhere nearby. Her lungs had to recalibrate. Everything up here demanded recalibration. The front door opened before she reached the porch. Spencer Whitfield stood in the frame, and Alara's breath caught, because he looked like her mother, the way a mountain looks like the earth it's made from. Same material, different scale. The same dark hair, silvered at the temples now. The same sharp bone structure. The same eyes, gray-green and watchful, that saw everything and commented on nothing. He was 63 years old. He was the alpha of one of the 7 founding packs. He had not spoken to his niece in 8 years because she represented, in her very existence, everything he believed had gone wrong with his sister's life. "Alara," he said, "not a greeting, an identification. The way you'd identify a species of bird you hadn't seen in your region before. Uncle Spencer. You look like her. I know." "That's not a compliment." I didn't take it as one. They looked at each other. The not dog on the porch watched with the disinterested attention of something that had seen many standoffs and found them all predictable. "Come in," Spencer said, and he turned and walked inside and left the door open, which was as close to a welcome as Spencer Whitfield got. The inside of the house was warm and sparse, and smelled like wood smoke and books. Every surface was either stone or timber. No decoration except the books, which lined the walls from floor to ceiling, in the kind of quantity that suggested a man who had replaced human company with bound paper and found the trade acceptable. He led her to a room with a fireplace and 2 chairs, and a window that framed the valley below like a painting that had decided to be real. He sat. He did not offer her tea or coffee or water. He waited. Alara sat in the other chair. The fire popped. A log settled. The not dog followed them in and lay down near the hearth, with the air of something that planned to listen without participating. "The Alpha King claimed me at the royal ball last night," she said, because Spencer Whitfield did not do small talk, and she had learned long ago that the fastest route between 2 points in his presence was a straight line through whatever made him uncomfortable. His expression did not change. "I heard." "You heard." "The entire kingdom heard. My phone has been ringing since midnight. I stopped answering at 2. The council is filing a challenge. The council has filed a challenge. It was submitted at 1:14 this morning. The Hardings sponsored it." Alara absorbed that. The Hardings, Meghan's extended family, who occupied seats of influence throughout the council infrastructure, who had been positioning Meghan as a candidate for the king's mate since before Meghan learned to walk. Of course they would move first and fastest. Cruelty was a family business, and they were very good at it. "They'll invoke the right of proving," Spencer continued. He was not telling her this as a courtesy. He was telling her this as a test. He wanted to see what she knew, and how she reacted, and whether she was worth the next 5 minutes of his time. 3 trials, Alara said. Physical, strategic, emotional, each designed by a different council member. His eyebrow moved. A fraction. The same fraction that ran in the family, apparently. "Who told you?" "The king. He's briefing you." "He made me breakfast and told me the truth. Whether that counts as briefing is a matter of interpretation." Spencer's mouth did something that, in a warmer man, might have been amusement. In Spencer, it was acknowledgement. "Why are you here, Alara?" "Because you're one of the 7. Because the trials will be designed by council members, and you're a council member. Because the Hardings want me to fail, and they have the resources and the motivation to design trials that ensure it. And you want me to protect you. I want you to be fair. Those aren't the same thing." "I know. I'm asking for the second one. The first one I can't afford." The fire cracked. A shower of sparks rose and died. The not dog opened one eye, assessed the situation, closed it again. "You have no wolf," Spencer said. "I'm aware. The right of proving was designed for wolves. Every trial, every test, every metric of evaluation assumes the candidate carries a wolf. Speed, strength, instinct, pack dynamics, territorial awareness. You have none of these. I have other things. What things? I survived 9 years in a house that wanted me gone, without losing my mind or my nerve. I can read a room faster than any wolf in it because I don't have instincts to rely on, so I had to build instruments instead. I can be underestimated by everyone in a building and use that as an advantage because nobody guards against a threat they don't believe exists. Spencer studied her. His gray-green eyes, her mother's eyes, her eyes, moved across her face with the clinical attention of a man evaluating evidence. You sound like your mother. My mother is dead. I'm aware. The words sat between them, heavy, loaded, full of a history that neither of them had processed, because processing it would require conversations they'd been avoiding for 8 years. She chose your father, Spencer said, against my counsel, against the pack's wishes, against every piece of evidence that suggested it would end badly. She chose him, and it ended the way I told her it would. It ended with her dead and me alive. I'm not sure that's the ending you predicted. I predicted the marriage would destroy her. I was right. The marriage didn't destroy her. Something else did. Something nobody in this family has been willing to name. The room went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of a fire and a conversation. The surgical quiet of something being opened that had been closed for a reason. Spencer's hands, resting on the arms of his chair, tightened. His knuckles whitened. The knot dog lifted its head. Be careful, Spencer said. I'm not here to be careful. I'm here to ask you something, and I need you to hear the question underneath the question. Then ask. My mother loved you. You were the person she trusted most in the world before she met my father. When she died, you could have stepped in. You could have claimed guardianship. You could have brought me into the Ashwick line and raised me as pack. Instead, you looked at a 14-year-old girl at her mother's funeral and told her she should never have been born, and then you walked away and didn't look back for 8 years. She paused. The fire was the only sound in the room. I'm not asking you why. I figured out why a long time ago. I'm asking you this. When you look at me right now, in this room, do you see the mistake you think my mother made, or do you see the daughter she would have fought for? Spencer Whitfield sat very still. The wolf inside him, old and powerful and constrained by decades of discipline, moved behind his eyes like something pacing in a cage it had built for itself. He looked at her mother's jaw, at her mother's eyes, at the stubbornness that lived in the set of her shoulders and the angle of her chin, the same stubbornness that had driven Nora Whitfield to marry a man who would fail her and love a daughter who would survive her. Both, he said. One word, heavy enough to anchor a ship. I see both. Ilara nodded. She didn't push. Pushing Spencer was like pushing a stone wall. You didn't move it. You wore it down. Then help me. Not because you think I deserve it. Not because you believe in the bond. Help me because my mother would have asked you to, and you would have said yes because you couldn't refuse her anything. And we both know that's the truth. The fire burned. The knot dog watched. The valley outside the window held its breath. Spencer stood. He walked to the window and looked at the valley he'd watched for 30 years, the territory he'd protected and controlled and shaped in his own image of what a pack should be. Pure bloodlines, strong wolves, clean hierarchies. And here was his sister's daughter, wolfless and claimed by a king, asking him to bend every principle he'd built his life around because of a dead woman and a living resemblance. The council meets in 3 days, he said to the window. I know. I can't guarantee fairness. The Hardings have too much influence. The trials will be designed to expose your weakness, which is your lack of a wolf, which is the only weakness that matters in this context. Then help me understand what I'm walking into. Tell me what the trials look like. Tell me who designs them. Tell me where the traps are. He turned from the window. His face was doing something she had never seen it do. Not softening exactly. Reorganizing. Like a structure that had been built for one purpose being repurposed for something it wasn't designed for. Your mother used to do this, he said. Walk into rooms she had no business being in and make everyone else feel like the intruders. Is that a yes? It's an observation. Uncle Spencer, yes or no? He sat back down. He looked at the fire. He looked at the knot dog. He looked at his niece with her mother's face and her mother's nerve, and a claim from the most powerful wolf in the kingdom hanging around her neck like an anchor or a crown, depending on how the next 3 days went. The first trial is physical, he said. Traditionally, it's a hunt. The candidate must track and capture a target in unfamiliar territory within a set time. The territory and the time are chosen by the designing council member. For wolf candidates, this is challenging but achievable. For you, without wolf senses, without heightened speed or smell or hearing, it's nearly impossible. Nearly. Don't interrupt me. She closed her mouth. The second trial is strategic. A scenario will be presented: a pack crisis, a territorial dispute, a resource conflict. The candidate must propose and defend a resolution before the full council. This is the trial where you might actually have an advantage, because strategy doesn't require a wolf. It requires intelligence and nerve, and you appear to have both. And the third? The third trial is emotional. It's the hardest. The designing council member will create a situation intended to provoke the candidate's deepest fear, their most vulnerable point, and observe how they respond. The purpose is to determine whether the candidate can maintain composure and judgment under extreme psychological pressure. They're going to find out what breaks me and then try to break me with it. Yes, and I have to not break. You have to not break in a way that convinces 7 alpha house leaders that you are strong enough to stand beside a king. Alara sat in the chair by the fire in her uncle's house and felt the weight of what she was about to do settle onto her shoulders like a coat made of iron and expectation. 3 trials: physical, strategic, emotional. Each one designed by people who wanted her gone. Each one calibrated to exploit the exact thing she didn't have. Who designs which trial? That's decided at the council meeting. Each member can volunteer for one trial. The Hardings will take the physical trial. They always do. It's the most straightforward way to eliminate a candidate without a wolf. And the emotional trial? That will go to whoever knows you best. Yalara's stomach dropped. Whoever knows her best. In a council of alpha house leaders, who knew her at all? Who had been watching her life closely enough to know where the cracks were, where the pressure points lived, where the 14-year-old girl who stopped crying still kept her tears? Claire Harding's family connections, Alara said. They've been in the house with me for 9 years. Claire Harding is not a council member, but her brother is, Frederick Harding. And Frederick talks to Claire the way Claire talks to Megan. Information flows downhill in that family. Spencer nodded. Slowly, the nod of a man who had just watched his assessment of his niece's intelligence move upward by several significant increments. Frederick Harding will design the emotional trial, Spencer confirmed, and he will use everything Claire has told him about you. Then I need to know what Claire knows about me. You've lived in her house for 9 years. She knows everything. She knows what I've shown her. I've been very careful about what I've shown her. Spencer's mouth did the not quite amusement thing again. You've been managing your information environment since you were 14. Since I was 13. Since my mother died and I moved into a house full of wolves who wanted me to know my place. And I decided my place was wherever I chose to stand. The fire was burning lower. The not dog had fallen asleep, its breath slow and rhythmic, the sound of something at peace in a room full of people who were not. I'll help you, Spencer said. Not because I approve, not because I believe the bond is real. I'll help you because my sister's daughter asked me, and my sister's daughter has her mother's face, and her mother's jaw, and her mother's absolute refusal to accept the word no as a permanent condition. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You don't know what the trials will cost. I know what failing will cost. Everything else is negotiable. He looked at her one more time, long and steady and searching. Whatever he found in her face settled something inside him, some old argument with a dead sister that had been running on repeat for 9 years. Come back tomorrow, he said. Early, we'll prepare. How early? Wolf early, before the sun. I'll be here. She stood. He didn't stand with her. He stayed in his chair by the dying fire, looking at the place where she'd been sitting, as if he could still see her mother's ghost in the empty space. She let herself out. The not dog opened one eye as she passed, and she could have sworn it winked. But dogs don't wink, and wolves don't either, so it was probably just a trick of the firelight. Eddie was waiting. Patient Eddie. Meter running Eddie. She got in the car and said, home. And then she sat in the back seat while the ruts and roots shook the car, and the trees thinned, and the road became a road again. Her phone buzzed. The king. How did it go? She typed back. He said yes. Dominic's reply took 30 seconds. My wolf is howling. She looked at the phone. At those 4 words. At the screen glowing in the back seat of a hired car in the mountains. She typed. Tell your wolf I said thanks, but I'm not howling back. I don't have the equipment. His reply. You have something better. What? A voice. My wolf can hear it. Not a howl. Something quieter. Like a heartbeat, but louder. Like the sound a compass makes when it finds north. Alara pressed the phone against her chest and closed her eyes and felt something in the space behind her ribs do something it had never done before. Not a wolf stirring, not a beast awakening. Something quieter, something older. Something that had always been there, underneath the testing and the measuring and the telling her she was less than, waiting for someone to hear it through all the noise. She didn't name it. Naming it would reduce it. She let it sit unnamed and enormous and hers. Eddie drove. The road smoothed out. The sky was turning the color of late afternoon, gold and amber, and the kind of blue that only exists at the edges. Tomorrow she would go back to Spencer's house before dawn and begin preparing for trials designed to break her. Tonight she would sleep in her storage closet bedroom with the sloped ceiling and the window that overlooked the parking area and dream about mountains and amber eyes and a wolf that heard what she couldn't say. 3 days. 2 now. The car drove south. The kingdom rearranged itself around a truth that was still forming, still hardening, still finding its shape in the space between a girl with no wolf and a king whose wolf had chosen her. Ilara opened her eyes, looked at the road ahead, looked at the sky above, looked at the phone in her hand where a king was telling her she sounded like North. She smiled. 3 smiles in 24 hours. At this rate, she'd be unrecognizable by Friday. She was at Spencer's gate at 4:47 in the morning. The sky was still dark and the air was cold enough to make her breath visible. She'd called Eddie at 4, and he'd answered on the second ring as if he'd been waiting, which she suspected he had been, because Eddie was the kind of man who took his responsibilities personally, even when those responsibilities were technically just commercial transactions. Spencer opened the door before she knocked. He was dressed in dark clothes, practical, the kind of clothes a man wears when he's planning to work rather than talk. He handed her a pair of boots. Yours won't hold up where we're going. They were her mother's. She knew immediately because they were the same shade of brown and the same size and the same slightly scuffed quality that Nora Whitfield had given everything she owned, the marks of a woman who used things rather than preserved them. She put them on. They fit perfectly because of course they did. Spencer led her into the woods behind his house, along a trail that wasn't a trail until he started walking it, the undergrowth bending aside for him, the way it bends for anyone who belongs to the land they're walking on. The not dog followed at a distance, moving through the trees with the silent efficiency of something that knew this territory in its bones. The physical trial will be a hunt, Spencer said without preamble. The Hardings will design the terrain. They'll choose difficult ground, something that favors wolf senses. Dense forest, low visibility, multiple elevation changes. The target will be a marked animal or an enchanted totem, something that requires tracking skill to locate and physical ability to reach. And I'm supposed to do this without wolf senses. Yes. So how do I track without a nose? You use your eyes. He stopped in a clearing where the pre-dawn light was beginning to filter through the canopy, turning everything gray and sharp-edged. He knelt and pointed at the ground. What do you see? She knelt beside him, looked at the earth, leaves, dirt, a twig, a stone, nothing. I see ground. Look again, slower. She looked again, slower. The leaves had patterns. Some were pressed flat, others curled. A line in the dirt that wasn't random, too straight, too even. A stone that was sitting on top of the leaf litter rather than settled into it. Something walked here. What? I don't know. Look at the depth, the spacing, the displacement of debris around each mark. She looked. The marks were even, spaced about 18 inches apart, pressed into the soft earth with a weight that suggested something medium-sized. A deer? Close. A doe. The stride length tells you sex. Bucks step wider. The depth tells you speed. Shallow means walking. Deep means running. This doe was walking. Calm? Feeding, probably. How do you know she was feeding? There. He pointed to a low branch where a leaf was torn, not broken by wind, but pulled, the kind of tear a mouth makes when it strips foliage from a stem. Alara looked at the torn leaf, at the tracks, at the pattern she hadn't seen until Spencer gave her eyes the permission to look differently. I can learn this. You can learn the basics in 2 days. A wolf pup learns it before it can walk. You'll be behind every candidate who has ever taken the physical trial. But I won't be blind. No, you won't be blind, and the Hardings won't expect you to see at all. They're designing the trial for a wolfless girl who trips over her own feet. They're not designing it for someone who can read a forest floor. They spent 3 hours in those woods. Spencer taught her to read broken branches and displaced stones and the directional pattern of disturbance that a moving animal leaves in its wake. He taught her to use wind direction by feeling it on the wet back of her hand. He taught her to listen, not with wolf hearing, but with human attention, to distinguish the silence of an empty forest from the silence of a forest holding its breath, because something is in it. He was a brutal teacher, patient but pitiless. When she missed a sign, he didn't point it out. He just stopped and waited until she found it herself, and the waiting was worse than any correction, because it contained the unspoken implication that her mother would have seen it in half the time. By mid-morning, she was exhausted, dirty, and marginally better at reading the woods than she'd been at dawn. Spencer looked at her the way a carpenter looks at a piece of wood, evaluating its grain, its flaws, its potential. Again tomorrow. Earlier. 4? 3:30. 3:30. He turned to walk back to the house and then stopped. Without turning around, he said, "She would have been proud of you." Alara's throat closed. She swallowed hard, twice, and said, "I know," and it came out steady, even though everything behind it was not. Back at Eddie's car, she checked her phone. 2 texts from Dominic. The first was informational. Council meeting confirmed for Thursday. The Hardings have submitted 3 objections and a petition for expedited review. The second was personal. "I dreamed about you in that green dress. My wolf is insufferable today." She typed back, "Tell your wolf to focus. We have work to do." His reply, "He says the work is you." She laughed, out loud, in the back seat of a hired car on a dirt road in the mountains. It sounded foreign, like hearing a song in a language she'd forgotten she spoke. "Good text?" Eddie asked. "Ridiculous text. Those are the best kind." She spent the afternoon at the Harding house pretending everything was normal, which required a level of acting skill she hadn't previously known she possessed. Claire was on the phone constantly, orchestrating something with the focused energy of a woman who had turned opposition into an art form. Megan was absent, at the home of a distant relative, Alara guessed, building alliances. Gerald sat in his chair. He had a new newspaper. He wasn't reading it. "Dad?" The newspaper lowered. "Yes? Did Mom ever talk about the right of proving?" His eyes widened, then narrowed, then did something complicated that involved moisture and memory, and a pain so old it had become structural. Once, she said it was barbaric. Did she say anything useful? She said the emotional trial was the one that mattered. She said the physical and strategic trials were obstacles. The emotional trial was a mirror. She said you couldn't prepare for it because the thing it tested was the thing you couldn't see in yourself. A mirror. Her word, not mine. Ilara nodded. She waited for him to raise the newspaper again. He didn't. He sat there, looking at her, with the newspaper in his lap and 9 years of silence on his face. "Are you scared?" he asked. "Yes." "Your mother was never scared." "My mother was always scared. She just never showed you." He absorbed that. She watched him absorb it, watched the information travel through him like a crack through ice, changing everything it touched. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it, for the house, for Claire, for the mirrors, for not looking at you when I should have been looking at nothing else. I know. You don't have to forgive me. I know that too." He nodded. She nodded. The newspaper stayed down. It was not forgiveness, and it was not resolution. It was something smaller and more practical, an acknowledgement. 2 people who shared a house and a last name and a loss, finally admitting out loud that the loss existed. She went upstairs, lay on her bed in the storage closet, stared at the sloped ceiling. Her mother's boots were still on her feet, the ones Spencer had given her, and they were warm and broken in, and fit like they'd been waiting. She thought about mirrors. The ones Claire had removed, the cracked one in her pillowcase, the word her mother had used for the emotional trial. A mirror, something that shows you what you can't see in yourself. What couldn't she see? She knew she was stubborn. She knew she was smart. She knew she was alone in a way that went deeper than circumstance, a fundamental aloneness that predated her mother's death and her father's withdrawal and the Harding household. She was alone the way a person is alone when the thing that should connect them to everyone else is simply missing. No wolf, no instinct, no pack bond, no belonging. She had built her entire identity on not needing those things, on surviving without them, on being enough, by herself, for herself, despite the deficit. What if that was the thing she couldn't see? What if her survival mechanism, the wall she'd built, the self-sufficiency she'd turned into armor, was also the thing the trial would use against her? What if the mirror showed her not her weakness, but her defense, and asked her to put it down? She picked up her phone, typed and deleted and typed again, stared at the screen, put the phone down, picked it up. She typed, "What are you afraid of?" Dominic's reply came slowly, slower than his usual rapid-fire responses. 3 minutes. Losing something I just found. She read it twice, 3 times. Felt the words settle into the space in her chest that had been doing the unnamed thing since yesterday. She typed back, "Me too." Then she closed her eyes. The ceiling sloped above her. Her mother's boots were warm on her feet. Tomorrow she would wake at 3 and go to Spencer's Woods and learn to see without wolf eyes, and prepare for a trial that might break her, and stand in a kingdom that didn't want her, and face a council that was designed to reject her. Tonight she slept. And in the morning, in the thin dark before dawn, her phone buzzed. One word from a king whose wolf hadn't slept all night. Ready? She laced up her mother's boots. She walked out of the Harding house for the 3rd time in 3 days. Eddie was waiting, engine running, heater on, the car warm and ordinary and reliable. She got in. "Spencer's?" Eddie asked. "Spencer's." The car drove north through the dark. The stars were still out. The mountains were shapes against a sky that was beginning to remember what light looked like. She typed back one word. Ready. The council met in 14 hours. The trials would begin in 24. Alara Whitfield, wolfless, half-blood, motherless, wearing a dead woman's boots and carrying a living king's claim, rode toward the dawn, in a hired car, driven by a man named Eddie, who charged by the hour, and had been married for 22 years, and still showed up scared. She was ready. Or she would be. Or she would die trying, which in wolf country was the same thing as being ready, just louder.